You wake before sunrise on the open prairie, wrapped in cold air, rough wool, and the deep ache of yesterday's ride. The ground beneath your bedroll is hard as packed clay, and somewhere in the half-dark a pot of coffee is already beginning to breathe steam into the morning. From far away, this life would look like freedom. Up close, it begins with stiffness, dust, and the slow effort of becoming a person again before the herd starts moving. Around you, other cowboys are rising from the earth one by one, shapes in the gray light, pulling on cold boots, reaching for their hats, coughing trail dust from their throats. No music, no glory, no easy romance. Just the open sky, the smell of smoke and coffee, and another day waiting to be worked through from the saddle. And that is the first truth of cowboy life. It looked beautiful from a distance because distance hid the discomfort. For a moment, you do not move. You lie still inside the fading dark, feeling where the earth pressed against you through the night. Your lower back is the first to complain, then your shoulders, then the long soreness running down through your hips and legs, the kind that comes not from a single injury, but from repetition. Too many hours in the saddle, too many nights sleeping wherever the outfit stops, too many mornings beginning before the body has fully forgiven the day before. The blanket over you is stiff with dust and the cold of pre-dawn. The one beneath you feels no softer than it did when you rolled into it in the dark, using fatigue as a substitute for comfort. The air carries that dry frontier chill that seems to find every opening in your clothes and settle there quietly, as if it has all the time in the world. Somewhere close by, a horse shifts its weight. Leather gives a small creak. A man mutters something half asleep, then coughs once into the gray. When you finally open your eyes, the prairie has not yet committed itself to morning. The horizon is only beginning to pale, a thin silver wash laid low across the land. The last stars are still visible above you, though weaker now, as if they too are tired. Around camp, the shapes of men in gear emerge gradually from the dark. A hat, brim, a rolled blanket, a saddle leaning against a wheel, the outline of the chuck wagon. Beyond that, farther off and darker than everything else, the resting mass of the herd. Nothing in the scene is dramatic. That is what makes it real. No one rises with heroic energy. No one looks as though this life has made him shine. The men around you move slowly at first, not lazily, but carefully, as though each joint must be convinced to do its work again. One sits hunched over while forcing his boots onto sore feet. Another stands with his hands on his hips, head lowered, waiting for his spine to loosen. Someone farther away is already rolling his bedroll tight, not because he feels fresh, but because routine is easier than thinking. This is how the day begins out here. Not with excitement, not with adventure, with recovery. You push yourself upright and feel the full complaint of your body arrive at once. For a second you stay there, elbows resting on your knees, looking down at the dirt between your boots. Your hands are dry and rough. Dust lives in the seams of your skin now, in the corners of your nails, at the edges of your cuffs, along your neck, behind your ears, inside the very fabric of your clothes. Out on the trail, dust is not an inconvenience. It is an atmosphere. It settles over men, tack, blankets, coffee cups, and thoughts alike until everything belongs to the same dry color. The coffee smell reaches you more fully now, dark and bitter and strong enough to feel almost merciful. It drifts in from the wagon with the smoke of the fire and cuts through the smell of wool, leather, horse sweat, and old ashes from last night's camp. It is not fine coffee. It is not careful coffee. It is trail coffee, boiled hard and black and welcome beyond words. Out here, that is enough. You reach for your hat and knock the dust from it against your thigh before setting it on your head. The brim is misshapen from use, the crown creased by weather and habit. It no longer looks new enough to belong to a dream. It looks like what it is, equipment. The same goes for the boots beside your bedroll. You turn one upside down and shake it before putting it on. Then the other. It is a small ritual, quiet and automatic, born from experience rather than worry. A man who sleeps outdoors learns quickly that the dark does not belong only to him. All around you, camp is gathering itself into motion. A few men are already walking toward the coffee pot, shoulders rounded against the cold. Others are still packing their bedding with that economical clumsiness of the half-awake. The horses stand where they were left, patient shapes in the dim light, their breath pale in the air. One flicks an ear at the sound of a tin cup knocking softly against another. Somewhere, a spur gives a faint metallic chime. Somewhere else, someone spits dust and sleep into the dirt. And still the sky brightens. There is beauty in it, though not the clean, painted beauty people prefer in stories. It is larger, quieter, and less flattering than that. The pale band of morning widening over the prairie, the cold silver before gold, the open stillness before the herd is moved, the feeling that the land goes on and on beyond sight, indifferent to whether a man is rested, paid fairly, or remembered at all. That is part of the seduction of the cowboy life, and part of the lie. Seen from a distance, everything important is framed by the sky. Seen from inside it, everything important begins with what hurts. Your back, your hands, your lips, your knees, the dryness in your throat, the dull fatigue still living in your bones before a new day's work has even begun. This is what later generations would not understand when they turned the cowboy into a symbol. They would keep the horizon and lose the stiffness. They would keep the horse and lose the hunger. They would keep the loneliness only in its handsome form, not in the real one. The kind that rises in the dark with you and asks your body for one more day before it has fully recovered from the last. But out here, in this half-light, the truth is simpler. Cowboy life did have beauty. It just made you earn the right to notice it. Another man rises nearby, blanket over one shoulder, hat pushed low, and makes his slow way toward the wagon. You follow him with your eyes for a moment, then look past him toward the horizon again. The silver there is beginning to warm now. Morning is coming whether anyone feels ready or not. The smell of coffee grows stronger. The camp grows more human by degrees. A few low voices, a cough, the scrape of leather, the muted thud of a boot heel on hard earth, the sound of men stepping back into themselves, because the work ahead will not wait for comfort. And before the day can even begin, a cowboy has already started working just to be ready for work. Before you can think about breakfast, or horses, or the herd, there is always the matter of your boots. You pick one up from the ground beside your bedroll and turn it upside down, giving it a hard shake before sliding your foot inside. Then the other. The movement is small, practiced, and utterly without drama, but it belongs to the hard wisdom of trail life. In the dark and the cold of the night, boots make inviting shelter for anything that crawls, stings, or bites. A warm leather hollow is as welcome to a scorpion as it is to a tired cowboy. And out here, one careless mistake before dawn can ruin a day, before it has even started. Nothing about the morning is automatic in the comforting sense. It is automatic in the survival sense. Shake the boots, check the hatband, find the gloves, roll the bedding, tie it tight, reach for the cup before the coffee is gone. All of it must be done half awake, half stiff, and without wasting motion. The prairie does not reward dawdling, and neither does a trail boss with 2,000 cattle waiting for daylight. By now, the camp is coming fully alive. The chuck wagon sits at the center of it like the closest thing this moving life has to a kitchen, a pantry, and a home. The fire beneath it glows brighter in the early light, and above that fire bends the man everyone calls Cookie, though it is unlikely many have ever used his real name in camp. He is thick through the shoulders, bent a little by years of work, and permanently aggrieved by the fact that hungry men continue to appear around him every morning, as if by personal insult. He handles pots and ladles with the irritated competence of someone who knows his importance perfectly well and has no desire to be thanked for it. Still, no one resents him much. Not when he controls the coffee. The smell hangs low over camp, dark and smoky and bitter enough to cut through sleep, dust, and backache all at once. You make your way toward it with the other cowboys, hat low, shoulders stiff, bedroll under one arm, or already tied off and set aside. Men gather in that loose, silent way of people who have not yet become talkative with the day. Someone mutters a greeting. Someone else grunts in return. Tin cups are lifted. A hand reaches for the pot before Cookie slaps it away and says, in a voice rough from smoke and impatience, that no man ever learned patience by standing near coffee, but he ought to try all the same. A few of the men laugh. Most are too cold or too tired for laughter this early. The trail boss is already awake, of course. Men like him seem built from rope, weather, and blunt necessity. He stands near the edge of camp, where he can see both the wagon and the dim resting shape of the herd beyond. He does not waste words because he does not need to. When he speaks, it is only to move the day forward. Sun's coming. Eat fast. Saddle faster. We move as soon as the cattle are up. No one answers with anything more than a nod. The answer is already built into the camp. You take your plate when Cookie shoves one at you and step aside. Breakfast is beans, bacon, and coffee. The same meal or near enough to the same meal as yesterday, and likely tomorrow too. The beans are thick and salted hard. The bacon is greasy, smoky, and more precious than anyone pretends. Coffee is black enough to seem medicinal. There are no delicate opinions about food on a cattle drive. If it is hot, filling, and quick to swallow, it is good. If it is not, it is still what you have. You eat standing at first, then crouch on your heels with the others in the cold dust. Tin cup warming your hands. Around you, morning works its way over the camp one ordinary hardship at a time. A man blows on his coffee and winces anyway when he drinks it. Another tears at bacon with fingers already cracked at the knuckles. Someone farther off is trying to saddle a horse that is not in a patient mood yet. Leather creaks. A horse stamps. A rope is pulled tight. A spur gives a little metallic sound that somehow belongs to morning, as much as birdsong belongs to other landscapes. The light is better now. Not bright yet, but enough to make faces clearer. This is one of the truths the movies nearly always miss. Cowboy camps were not made up of one kind of man. Even before the day begins, you can see that in the line around the wagon, in the voices, in the clothes, in the way each man wears his labor different. There are black cowboys here whose skill in the saddle matters more than the world back east would ever willingly admit. There are vaqueros whose fathers and grandfathers understood cattle and rope long before Anglo Trail outfits began pretending they invented the work. There are immigrants with accents from places far beyond the prairie, men who came west with little except the willingness to endure what softer lives could not ask of them. There are boys barely grown into their bones. There are older hands who seem to have been weathered into the shape of the job itself. Out here, a man's past still exists, but the herd cares very little about it. What matters on the trail is whether you can ride, rope, stay awake, keep calm, and do your share without making extra trouble for everyone else. A dangerous job has a way of flattening certain differences while sharpening others. Reliability matters. Nerve matters. Good judgment matters. If a man lacks those, the trail exposes him quickly. You finish eating and hand your plate back to Cookie, who takes it with the expression of a man convinced civilization was a mistake, but breakfast remains necessary. Then the next part begins. No one lingers. No one leans back with the luxury of being full. The meal is not a pause in the day. It is fuel inserted into it. Men peel away from the wagon toward their gear, their bedrolls, their saddles, their horses. The camp seems to break into small purposeful movements all at once. You crouch beside your bedding and roll it tight, pulling the blanket in hard so it does not come loose later. What you own fits into a shape small enough to strap behind a saddle. A spare shirt, if you are lucky. An extra pair of socks, if you are prudent. Tobacco. Maybe a razor. Maybe a keepsake folded in cloth, or tucked deep, where other men will not see it. The trail teaches simplicity, by force. If you cannot carry it, it had better matter enough to burden a horse. If it does not, then it belongs to someone with a roof. A cowboy morning is already work long before the cattle move. You check your tack next, strap by strap, buckle by buckle, as carefully as a man checks his own chances. Cinch, stirrup leather, breast collar, rope, bridle, bit. A small failure in town is inconvenience. A small failure on the trail becomes danger with astonishing speed. A loose cinch can throw you. A bad stirrup leather can cripple you. A frayed rope can cost you a stray, a horse, a hand, or worse. Nothing is theatrical about this care. It is just another tax a hard life collects before breakfast has even settled. Then you go to your horse. He is waiting where you left him, head low, patient in the cold, already more dependable than many men a cowboy will meet in town. Before you think of yourself again, you think of him. That is another rule the trail teaches without needing to say it aloud. Your horse comes first because your life quite literally travels on his back. A man may be tired, hungry, sore, sunburned, and half sick with dust, but if his horse is lame, cut, swollen, badly shod, or poorly saddled, then the day is already compromised. You run your hand down each leg, check for heat, check the hooves, pick out whatever the ground tried to leave inside them overnight. You study the eyes, the ears, the set of his body. Horses speak constantly if a man learns how to listen. A good trail horse knows cattle, reads sudden movement, saves human beings from their own foolishness more often than they deserve, and asks in return only feed, care, and not being ridden by an idiot. Nearby, other men are doing the same. A vaquero murmurs to his mount in Spanish as he tightens the cinch. One of the black cowboys on the outfit checks a sore spot under his horse's blanket and changes the pad before it can worsen. An immigrant hand whose English still catches at the edges says little to the men, but speaks to his horse with easy certainty. In this light, the camp becomes a study in competence, not elegance, not romance, just men preparing tools, animals, and bodies for another day, whose only promise is that it will ask for everything again. And yet, there is something almost soothing in the repetition. Coffee steam rising in pale ribbons, leather creaking as saddles settle into place, the soft thud of bedrolls being strapped down, the growing gold of dawn touching wagon wheels, shoulders, hat brims, horsebacks, the sense that everyone knows what comes next, even if no one is particularly eager for it. That is the strange mercy hidden inside hard routine. When life is this physical, this repetitive, this demanding, routine itself becomes a kind of shelter. You do not need comfort if you have sequence. You do not need ease if you have order. A cowboy can survive a great deal on coffee, muscle memory, and the knowledge of what the next 5 tasks are. Even the quietest part of a cowboy's day was never truly rest. It was preparation disguised as routine. By now, the darkness has thinned into morning proper. The horizon is warming. The camp looks less like a scatter of sleeping bodies and more like what it is. A temporary machine made of men, horses, leather, iron, fire, and discipline. All of it built to move cattle north through distance, heat, boredom, danger, and time. You take one last swallow of coffee. The cup is still warm. The leather beneath your hand gives another small creak. Beyond camp, the herd is stirring now, dark backs shifting in the early light. One by one, the cattle are rising, and with them, the real day. And once the herd begins to move, the true shape of cowboy life reveals itself in dust, distance, and repetition. BNMI, DNC, Ka, Ore, OMT, Jean, Dogaged Kwan, Dai Goki, Helto, Adintuhadet Story for Slay. Mounting up never feels dramatic from the inside. Not this early. Not with a back that still remembers the ground and legs that have not quite forgiven yesterday. You place one boot in the stirrup, gather the reins, and pull yourself into the saddle with the slow, practiced effort of a man who has done the same thing too many mornings in a row. The leather gives under your weight with a familiar creak. Your horse shifts once, breathes out, and settles. Around you, other riders are doing the same, rising into the pale morning one by one. Bedrolls tied down, hats low, ropes coiled, coffee still warm in the stomach. The herd is already waking. Out ahead, in the widening light, the longhorns begin to lift themselves from the ground and gather into motion. First, it is only a stirring, a few heads turning, a few dark backs rising, horns catching the first weak sunlight. Then the whole shape of the herd starts to move, not quickly, not cleanly, but with that heavy living drift that belongs to cattle and no other creature. There are so many of them that they seem, for a moment, less like animals than like weather moving across the grass. Today you ride the flank. That means the side of the herd where the work is constant and rarely noticed. The point riders help lead the drive. The drag riders swallow the worst of the dust behind. But the flank rider spends the day keeping the whole thing from loosening and spilling apart. Too much pressure, and the cattle crowd each other and grow restless. Too little, and they begin to drift outward, each small wandering thought threatening to become a larger problem. So you ride the edge, shaping movement without ever fully stopping it. That is the work. Not forcing, guiding, correcting, holding the day together one small decision at a time. The first dust rises almost at once. It begins low around the hooves, then lifts and spreads until it turns the early light pale and dirty. You pull your bandana higher over your mouth, though it helps less than you would like. Dust on the trail has a way of finding every opening. It settles into your collar, your cuffs, the corners of your eyes, the cracks in your lips. By the end of the day, it will be on your teeth, in your hair, on your plate, in your blanket, and still the next morning, there will be more of it waiting. Your horse feels sharp beneath you now. A good trail horse does not need every thought explained. He understands cattle, understands pressure, understands when a drifting animal matters, and when it does not. You guide him with knees, reins, posture, and habit, more than with any grand visible motion. That is another thing people misunderstand about cowboy work. From a distance, skill can look almost like doing nothing. The best riders are often the quietest in the saddle because they are not reacting late. They are feeling trouble while it is still small. You begin to read the herd the way an experienced hand always does, not as one solid mass, but as signs. A steer angling too far toward open grass, a nervous ripple through one section, a hesitation where the ground changes underfoot, a small tightening that may turn into bunching, a little widening that may become drift. Reading cattle is not unlike listening, only with your eyes instead of your ears. You learn to notice what an animal is about to do before it does it. Or at least, if you are good at the work, you learn to notice early enough that the correction still feels easy. One of the steers on your side begins to edge out. Not enough to panic anyone. Not yet. Just a quiet decision forming in the body of the animal. You turn your horse toward it before the move is complete. Not too fast. Fast enough to matter, but not enough to startle. The gelding cuts across the grass in a clean, shallow arc, and your presence alone is enough to make the steer think better of it. It swings its head, pauses, and folds back toward the herd. The line holds. Then the next thing needs doing. That is how the hours pass. Ride. Watch away. Correct. Door. Wait. Ride again. A cattle drive can feel strangely hypnotic from inside it. No motion is repetitive enough to dull the mind if you let it. Hoofbeats. Dust. Heat rising. Leather creaking. Cattle breathing. The same horizon shifting only a little from hour to hour. But the danger of the work lies partly in that sameness. The body wants to drift. The eyes want to soften. Attention wants to loosen. The cattle do not forgive that for long. Not far ahead, a yearling breaks from the edge and darts outward with more conviction than the earlier steer. You feel it before you fully think it. A shift in the line, A little burst of wrong movement. Your horse feels it too. You turn him hard enough this time to close the angle before the yearling can turn its little freedom into a chase worth half the morning. The rope is already in your hand by the time you reach open stride. There is a kind of quiet beauty in rope work when it is done well. Not because it is flashy, but because it is precise. You free the coil and begin to swing, the loop rising above you in smooth circles that seem almost lazy until you notice how exact they are. The horse runs straight and steady. The yearling cuts left. Dust jumps under the hooves. You throw. For a brief moment, the loop hangs in the air between intention and outcome. Then it settles where it needs to. The rope goes taut. Your horse braces. The yearling checks in surprise and anger, pulling once, then twice, before the pressure and the angle of your horse begin to turn it back toward the moving herd. None of it lasts long. None of it looks as grand from the inside as it might in memory. It is a small working success, one among dozens that fill a day. You free the rope, gather it again, breathe once through the dust, and return to your place on the flank. No one has time to praise you. That is not what the trail is for. Somewhere farther down, another rider is already turning back a second wanderer. Beyond him, the point riders keep the front moving. Behind you, the drag riders disappear half the time in a cloud of pale brown dust, still holding the rear together where the air is worse and the work dirtiest. Each man is doing his share of the same endless task, and the drive only works because all of them keep doing it, without needing each little success named. By mid-morning the sun is higher, and the day has started to harden. The coolness of dawn is gone now. Heat begins to gather on your shoulders and along the brim of your hat. Sweat forms beneath your shirt and at the base of your neck, only to mix with dust and turn to grit against the skin. Your thighs ache where they press the saddle. Your hands feel used already, though the longest part of the day still lies ahead. Out on the prairie there is very little shade, and even less sympathy. Still, the work holds your attention. A shallow wash appears ahead, and the cattle hesitate. You feel the herd compress for a moment, as those in front slow, and those behind continue on. A rider at point angles wide to ease the line through. You hold your side steady, making sure the hesitation does not become a turn. A little farther on, one section pushes too close to another, and you must edge in just enough to keep them from bunching. Then comes a stretch where nothing much happens at all, except movement, dust, and time. This, too, is cowboy work. Not every minute is danger. Most minutes are management. That may be why later generations romanticized it so easily. From far away, all they saw was a rider beneath a big sky. They did not feel how much of the day disappeared into repetition. They did not feel the weight of staying attentive, while almost nothing seemed to change. But a cattle drive stayed alive not through bravery in the storybook sense. It stayed alive through patience, skill, and the ability to do the same hard thing well for hours on end. A hawk circles overhead. The grass rolls outward in low waves. A line of distant land sits blue beneath the light. Your horse breathes steadily under you. For a moment, the work and the landscape fit together so completely that the whole life almost makes sense. Not because it is easy, not because it is noble in some theatrical way, but because there is a clean honesty to it. The horse must be ridden well. The cattle must be held together. The body must endure what the body must endure. There is very little room for pretending. Then the dust thickens again, another steer tests the edge, and the day folds you back into itself. So it goes. Hoofbeats, dust, breathing, creak of leather, the soft, relentless movement north. And for all the skill it required, most of a cowboy's life still came down to enduring discomfort without complaint. By midday, the day is no longer something you ride through. It is something you endure. The sun has climbed high enough now that the prairie seems to give back heat from every direction at once. Light presses down from above and rises off the ground beneath the herd in a pale, punishing glare. The air itself feels thinner, sharper, as though each breath has been strained through dust before reaching your lungs. Your mouth is dry again no matter how recently you swallowed. Your lips have split at the corners. When you run your tongue across them, you taste salt, leather, and grit. The canteen at your side feels heavier than its size should allow. Not because it is full, but because every sip must be weighed against the miles still ahead. So you drink carefully, not to satisfy thirst. That would be impossible. Only to quiet it for a little while. A small swallow, then the cap back on. Water on the trail is never merely water. It is time, judgment, and restraint hanging from your saddle in a battered metal shape. A careless man drinks early and suffers later. A disciplined one learns to live beside thirst the way he lives beside dust, soreness, and fatigue, not defeating them, only managing them. That, more than almost anything else, is what cowboy life really was. Management of discomfort. The horse beneath you is warm now, his neck darkened with sweat beneath the mane, his breathing heavier than it was in the cool hours after dawn. You shift in the saddle to give your hips some relief, and find none worth mentioning. There is no position left that feels new. Your lower back has settled into a steady ache. The insides of your knees burn from holding the horse for hours. The muscles along your thighs feel both overused and somehow half asleep. And your hands, though busy enough with reins and rope, seem no longer to belong entirely to comfort. A cowboy can become so used to pain that he stops naming its smaller forms. The saddle rub at the base of the spine, the raw place where shirt seam meets shoulder, the stiffness in the wrist from coiling rope, the deep soreness in the hips from living half the day with your legs turned outward around a horse's ribs, the dull headache that comes not from one cause, but from heat and hunger and glare and thirst and bad sleep adding themselves together until the mind feels as though it has been packed with wool. Nothing here is dramatic enough to be admired from outside. That is why it matters. The real hardship of cowboy life rarely arrived as a single unforgettable event. It lived in accumulation. A little dust, a little heat, a little hunger, a little soreness, a little less sleep than the body required. Then the next day, the same again, before the first day had fully left your bones. Even the pace of the herd contributes to it. Cattle are slow enough to be tiring and fast enough to prevent rest. There is no real pause inside the motion, only different shades of effort. You ride, you watch, you angle your horse, you hold the line, you drift back, you move forward again. Sometimes the repetition is almost numbing. Then a steer edges wrong, a gap opens, a section bulks at rough ground, and the body must answer all at once as if it has not already been working since dawn. That is the strange cruelty of the work. It asks for patience and readiness at the same time. A careless rider who gives himself over to monotony becomes useless the moment monotony breaks. But a rider who keeps himself fully alert through every mile spends the day consuming his own nerves. So most cowboys learn a middle state, not relaxed, not tense, but half suspended. Working watchfulness that burns slowly and leaves very little behind by evening. The herd drifts over, a stretch of poorer ground now, the grass shorter, the earth harder, and the dust deepens. It rises around the cattle and hangs there, pale as old paper in the heat. You have stopped noticing how often you blink against it. The skin at the back of your neck prickles under your shirt. Flies worry at the horses. Sweat dries almost as quickly as it forms, leaving behind a sticky crust of salt and dirt that will still be on you at night because there is no water to spare for washing and no point pretending otherwise. A clean cowboy on the trail would be a suspicious sight. Hygiene out here has little to do with freshness and everything to do with function. You wipe your face when the grit gets too thick to see through. You rinse a hand if it must touch food. You wash a shirt when chance and weather and water all somehow agree, which they often do not. More commonly, a man simply wears the day until the next day lays itself on top of it. Dust in the beard, Dust in the collar, dust in the bedroll, dust in the coffee cup. A body slowly changing from a private thing into a working surface on which the trail leaves its mark. The food does not help much. There is no proper noon meal waiting somewhere ahead, no inviting break under shade with a spread worth looking forward to. Dinner and breakfast belong to the chuck wagon if the day goes well. Midday belongs to whatever a man has in his pocket or tied up badly enough not to fall from the saddle. Jerky, hard bread, a biscuit saved from morning, if he had the foresight and the luck not to crush it flat. Nothing soft, nothing fresh, nothing that belongs to appetite rather than necessity. When you chew on the trail, it is less a pleasure than a reminder that the body needs feeding before it can continue being useful. And if the food is poor, the wages are not much better. Men later like to imagine the cowboy as some free prince of the open range, answerable to no one, king of distance and horizon. In reality, most cowboys were working men paid just enough to stay in the work. Seasonal wages, often small, stretched over hard months and harder winters. Enough perhaps to buy a little tobacco, mend gear, put a few dollars by if a man was careful, and waste the rest in town if he was not. It was not the sort of life that made many men rich. It was the sort that used up youth, back, knees, and luck a little faster than other work did. That is another quiet disappointment inside the legend. The hardship was real. The pay was ordinary. The romance came later, when someone else did the remembering. Ahead, a section of the herd begins to loosen toward a greener patch, and you push your horse that way. Too tired to resent the need, and too trained not to answer it. The gelding goes because you ask him and because this too is his day of labor. You turn 3 steers back with pressure more than speed. One of them swings a horn close enough to remind you, without malice, what sort of animal you are riding beside for hours at a time. The danger is always there, not large enough to dominate every minute, not absent enough to forget. That is the true rhythm of the trail, boredom punctuated by fear. Not constant terror, which a body could not survive for long, and not harmless repetition, which would be too easy. Instead, long stretches of physical sameness interrupted by the need for very quick judgment. A horse stumbles in a prairie dog hole. A steer wheels suddenly. A rider drifts too close to a horn. A section of the herd starts at thunder far away or at a sound no man fully caught. Nothing happens, and then something almost happens, and then nothing again, except that every almost happening leaves a little more wear behind. By early afternoon, even the beauty of the land begins to feel expensive. The scale enormous, yes. The grass still rolls away in long bright waves. Heat still turns the distance faint and wavering as if the whole prairie were breathing slowly under the sun. But beauty without shade can become another burden. Vastness without shelter can feel less like freedom than exposure. A man may admire the country in passing, but he rides through it with split lips, a sore back, and a canteen he dares not empty. No one pays a cowboy for wonder. They pay him to keep moving. And so the day keeps asking the same things. Ride straight. Stay alert. Use less water. Ignore the ache. Correct the drift. Watch the heat. Swallow the dust. Keep going. This is why the work shaped men the way it did. Not into fearless adventurers, but into practical creatures of endurance. Men who saved their sympathy for horses and not always for each other. Men who learned to speak little because speech did not lighten the saddle. Men who measured distance in water, weather, and how long the herd had held steady rather than in anything as abstract as miles. If there is tenderness in the life, it comes mostly in what men spare one another from saying. No one asks if your back hurts because of course it does. No one comments on the dust because it belongs to all of you equally. No one says the coffee was poor because poor coffee is still coffee. No one admits he is tired until he makes a mistake, and by then the admission has already come too late. The hardest part of cowboy life was not the occasional danger, but the endless discomfort that never quite stopped. Not enough to kill. Not enough to become legend by itself. just enough to wear a man down by degrees, while the work asks for more. The afternoon stretches on. Hot wind moves low across the prairie and dries the sweat as soon as it forms. Dust settles into every fold of clothing, every seam of leather, every tired crease of the body. Your horse goes on beneath you. The herd goes on ahead of you. The sun, having climbed to its worst height, begins at last its long, slow drift downward. And when it finally does, the trail offers something close to relief, though never quite comfort. By late afternoon, the trail boss is already watching the land for night. Not because the men are tired, though they are. Not because the sun is dropping, though it is. But because a cattle drive can only stop where the ground allows it. Water first, then grass, then enough shape in the land to help hold the herd without making them uneasy. A shallow creek, a gentle rise, a stretch of earth that feels, for one night at least, willing to receive both cattle and men. At last the place is chosen. The herd is turned toward a narrow creek lined with better grass, and the mood of the whole drive changes almost at once. What had been forward motion all day begins to soften into settling. The Longhorns lower their heads. Their pace eases. Dust still hangs in the air, but less fiercely than before, as if even it has grown tired of rising. The sun is lower now, pouring a worn golden light across the prairie, and everything that looked harsh at noon looks gentler simply because the day is loosening its grip. You feel that loosening too. Not relief exactly. Relief is too generous a word for trail life, but something close to it. The herd is no longer being pushed north for the moment. The line no longer needs constant correction. The horse beneath you, though still warm and sweat darkened, has lost that taut working energy and begun to think of water, grass, and stillness. Little by little, the cattle bed down. Some remain standing, chewing slowly, tails flicking at the last flies of the day. Others fold themselves into the grass with the heavy, awkward grace of large animals surrendering to fatigue. Their horns catch the last light in pale curved lines before the dusk begins to flatten everything into silhouette. Sound changes too. Hoofbeats fade. Breathing takes over. A low, restless murmur moves through the herd, but it is no longer the sound of motion. It is the sound of a living thing, settling. That is always the first gift of evening. Not comfort, only the end of forward movement. You swing down from the saddle, and the ground feels wrong for a moment, as it always does after so many hours riding. Your legs are stiff, your hips slow to straighten, your lower back sore in the old familiar way. For a second you keep one hand on the saddle and let your body remember itself. Around you, other men are doing the same, dismounting without grace, stretching without admitting they are stretching, landing heavily and pretending not to notice how much it hurts. Then comes the part of the evening that matters most. The horse first, always, before food, before coffee, before sitting down, before any thought of your own rest. You strip away saddle and bridle, lifting warm leather from a warmer animal, and your gelding exhales as if he too has been waiting all day for this moment. You run your hand along his back, his shoulders, the places where tack pressed and rubbed. You check his legs. You lift a hoof and clear it. You study him in the lowering light for heat, swelling, or any small trouble that tomorrow could turn serious. Nearby, the rest of the outfit moves through the same ritual. Saddles thump softly to the ground. Bridles are hung. Cinches loosen. Horses lower their heads to drink. No one needs to be reminded. Out here, a man may go hungry for an hour and survive it. A horse pushed too far, neglected, or half-checked can cost a man everything. That simple fact lies beneath nearly every tenderness in cowboy life. By the time your horse is watered, rubbed down, and turned to grass, the smell from the chuck wagon has begun to reach you. Beans, bacon grease, coffee, maybe biscuits if the cook has flour enough and the mood to spend it. It is not a smell that belongs to luxury. It belongs to survival made warm. And after a day of dust, sun, thirst, and constant watchfulness, it is enough to draw. Every man in camp toward the wagon as surely as church bells draw townspeople home. Cookie. Or is there, of course, moving with the same sour efficiency he began the morning with. It says little that can be mistaken for kindness, but his fire says enough. Tin plates are passed out. Ladles descend. Coffee is poured black and steaming into battered cups. Men accept their portions with the quiet seriousness of people who know exactly how much a hot meal matters when the body has spent itself. You take your plate and settle onto the ground while the last of the light leaves the west. The beans are the same beans they nearly always are. The bacon no finer than yesterday's. The coffee strong enough to feel almost medicinal. And yet, at the end of a trail day, this kind of meal becomes something larger than its ingredients. It is heat, salt, stillness, repair. Around you, the camp speaks in its evening voice now. Lower, slower, more human. A few men talk quietly over their plates. Not stories yet, not fully. Just fragments. A comment on the bed ground. A remark about a horse that held up well in the heat. A muttered complaint about a steer that kept testing the edge of the line. Someone laughs once, softly. Someone else drinks coffee in silence and watches the herd as though the habit of watching has not yet left his body. This is the cowboy version of a safe place. Not walls, not a bed, not softness. Only food while it is hot, horses while they are still sound, and the herd quiet enough that a man can hear himself think again. For a cowboy, peace rarely meant comfort. It meant the herd was calm, the horse was sound, and the night had not yet gone wrong. Darkness gathers slowly after that. The creak becomes harder to see and easier to hear. The herd turns into a low dark country of horns and backs. The wagon fire grows brighter by comparison, its smoke rising into evening air that is cooling at last. One by one the stars begin to appear overhead, first the boldest ones, then the smaller lights behind them, until the whole sky opens with that impossible frontier abundance no town could ever hold above itself. Some of the men begin to spread their bedrolls. Others sit a little longer with coffee cups in hand, too tired to speak and not yet ready to lie down. The day has used them thoroughly. Even small movements now seem deliberate. A boot pulled off, a hat pushed back, a shoulder rolled once to ease the ache there. In the dark, these little gestures look almost tender, though no one would use such a word. Then the night riders take their places. A few men mount up and begin the slow circling watch around the herd, moving wide and steady through the dark. And from time to time, one of them sings. Not loudly, not well, necessarily, but softly enough to belong to the night instead of cutting through it. The song is for the cattle, to let them know where the riders are, to keep the passing horse from becoming a sudden shape that might startle them into fear. But it is also for the men trying to sleep. Quiet human sound, moving around the edges of darkness. A reassurance that someone is awake, that the perimeter still holds, that for now, all is as it should be. You spread your own bedroll at last. The ground is no kinder than the ground ever is, but fatigue has lowered your standards beyond argument. Boots come off, and are placed where your hands can find them quickly if needed. Your saddle goes beneath your head. The blanket smells faintly of dust, wool, and old smoke. Above you, the stars deepen. Around you, camp settles one body at a time into the rough shape of rest. The singing drifts again through the dark. So do the softer sounds beneath it, cattle breathing, horses shifting, the creak moving over stones, a coal settling deeper into ash. Everything that by day demanded effort now offers only presence. This is the nearest thing to peace the trail allows. Not true ease, not full safety, only a temporary truce between the work and the body. Your eyes grow heavy. The ache in your back dulls a little once you stop resisting it. The night air cools your face, while the blanket holds what warmth it can. Out beyond the firelight, the herd lies quiet, and above it the sky seems so wide that even fatigue begins to feel small beneath it. But even sleep on the trail was never fully yours, because the herd needed watching long after the body had given out. A hand touches your shoulder in the dark, and sleep breaks apart before it has finished mending you. For a moment you do not know where you are inside your own body. The blanket is warm in one place, cold everywhere else. The ground beneath your bedroll feels harder than it did when you lay down, as if the earth itself has stiffened in the night. You keep your eyes closed for 1 second longer, hoping foolishly that the voice beside you has made some mistake. But it has not. Your watch. The words are spoken low, almost kindly, and then the man who woke you is already moving away, grateful to be done with his part of the night. Around you, camp remains almost entirely still. Bedrolls rise and fall in slow sleeping shapes. The fire has burned down to a red basin of embers. Beyond that small glow lies the rest of the world, cold, wide, and waiting. You push yourself upright. At once the day you already lived returns to collect its debt. Your back, your thighs, the deep ache in your hips from too many hours in the saddle, and not enough hours on anything softer than earth. Even your hands feel tired when you place them on the ground to steady yourself. Sleep has taken the edge off nothing. It has only paused the discomfort, and now hands it back. The air bites hotter once you are sitting up. That is the second shock. All day the prairie burned. Now it has gone clear and cold under the stars, and the chill moves through your shirt, your coat, the seams of your sleeves, the open skin at your throat. Somewhere out in the dark, the herd breathes as one low unseen presence. A horse shifts its weight. Tack gives a faint metallic sound. Then stillness again. A fire, a coffee pot waits near the embers. You pour by the little light there is, careful not to spill what matters. The cup warms your hands first, then your mouth, then your chest. The coffee tastes burnt, bitter, and faintly of iron. But at this hour it feels less like a drink than like a tool. Something to carry you over the narrow bridge between sleep and duty. No cowboy on the trail ever truly owned his rest. He borrowed it, and some nights the trail took it back too soon. You pull on your boots by feel. The leather is cold and stubborn. Coat next. Gloves, if you have them. Hat low. Revolver checked more by habit than fear. The dark changes the cost of carelessness, and even half awake, the body remembers that. Then you go to your horse. He lifts his head as you approach, ears turning toward you in the quiet. Perhaps he knows the hour. Or perhaps he only knows interruption the way you do. You run a hand down his neck before setting the saddle in place, more to steady yourself than him. The leather creaks softly. Buckle, strap, cinch. Once, then again to be sure. In daylight, a loose cinch is a bad mistake. In darkness, it can become something worse. You mount slowly, and the saddle receives you with the unwelcome familiarity of unfinished work. The fire stays behind as you ride out. Its glow shrinks quickly, becoming only a dull red pulse near the wagon. Ahead lies the herd, spread in darkness across the chosen ground. At first it seems motionless. Then, as your eyes adjust, you begin to see the small life inside it. A head lifting and lowering again, the turn of a horn, a body settling deeper into grass, the long collective breathing of animals not fully asleep and never entirely still. You take your place along the outer circle. A few other riders are already out there, spaced wide around the herd, each one keeping his stretch of the night. No one calls out. There is no need. Loud voices carry badly over cattle and make too much of a disturbance. Instead, the work begins in its usual way, slowly, almost gentle. Ride. Listen. Circle. Listen again. Night watch is one of the strangest parts of cowboy life because it can feel, for a few moments at a time, almost peaceful. The horse walks quietly beneath you. The stars overhead are bright enough to seem cold. The moon, not full but useful, lays a pale wash over parts of the grass and the backs of the nearest cattle. The air smells of trampled earth, horse, creek water, and old smoke drifting faintly from camp. It would almost be a beautiful thing if the body were not so tired. To keep the herd calm, you hum under your breath. Not loudly, not well, just enough for the nearest cattle to hear that a rider is there. The sound is not for pleasure. It is for reassurance. A horse passing close in darkness can startle bedded cattle if it arrives without warning. A soft human voice smooths the edges of that fear before it has a chance to sharpen. Other riders do the same in their own sections of the circle. Here and there, a low fragment of song drifts through the dark and disappears again. The herd answers with quiet sounds of its own. A long exhale, a hoof shifting, a low murmur from one animal to another. The soft brushing of hide against hide. The whole night seems held together by small sounds. And still, what you fight most is not the darkness. It is sleep. That is the hidden cruelty of night watch. People imagine danger. Rustlers, wolves, Indians, a midnight stampede exploding under lightning. All of those things are possible, yes, but most nights, the real enemy is simpler than that. It is the weight behind your eyes, the soft pull downward in your neck, the way the body, once warmed and seated again in the saddle, begins trying to slide back toward rest, whether the mind allows it or not. You catch yourself drifting once, then again, not fully asleep, never that far, just that dangerous, halfway state where attention loosens and the world blurs at the edges. The horse's steady motion does not help, nor does the vast sameness of the dark. The circle continues. The herd remains quiet. The stars turn so slowly that only fatigue seems to notice. This is when the work becomes hardest, not when something happens, when almost nothing happens at all, because a cowboy's exhaustion has to remain useful. The body must stay awake enough to respond even when the night gives it no fresh reason to do so. That kind of wakefulness costs more than sudden fear. It is a slower tax, collected minute by minute. A sound out beyond the herd changes the air in you at once. Not loud, not clear, only wrong enough. Your horse hears it too. One ear turns outward. You slow him and listen. For a few moments, the whole world seems to shrink into that act. No movement from the herd yet. No sign of alarm from the other riders. Just the dark, the breathing cattle, and somewhere beyond them, a disturbance too small to name. Your hand rests near the revolver, but does not draw. That is another truth of trail life. A gun is often less useful than calm. Fire too quickly near cattle and you may create more danger than you stop. So you wait. Listen. Let the dark speak again if it means to. It does. A little farther off this time. Then, silence. Then, at last, the narrow moving shape of a coyote crossing some break in the land. Low and quick, and barely silvered by the moon. Not rustlers. Not worse. Just hunger at the edge of another living thing. Your pulse settles slowly after that. The horse lowers his head a fraction. The herd remains bedded. The circle resumes. This is the true rhythm of night watch. Long quiet stretches in which the body nearly folds into itself, broken by moments of alertness so sharp they seem to leave the nerves exposed afterward. Then back again to the slow turning of the perimeter. Back to humming. Back to watching black shapes breathe in the dark. A cowboy did not sleep in clean pieces. He borrowed rest in fragments and paid for it with his body the next day. That is what the trail took most consistently. Not blood, not courage, sleep. It took it by watches, by weather, by worry, by the simple fact that 2,000 cattle cannot be trusted to the dark alone. And when sleep is broken, night after night, a man begins to wear his tiredness like part of his character. It settles into the eyes, the shoulders, the patience, the silence. Exhaustion stops feeling temporary. It becomes part of the job's texture, as ordinary as dust or leather. Time moves strangely after midnight. You begin to measure it not in hours, but in signs. The moon drifting lower, the embers behind camp fading to a duller red, the cold deepening, then easing slightly, a steer rising from the ground, another rider appearing briefly at the far side of the herd, then disappearing again. The stars near the eastern edge of the sky losing a little of their authority. The dark is not empty at this hour. It is simply very full of things too quiet to be called events. Moonlight on your horse's neck, steam from his breath, a rider's song carried thin on the air, the creak glinting once and vanishing. A sky so wide it makes even tiredness seem small for a moment. There is loneliness in it, yes, but also a kind of stripped-down calm that no town can offer. Out here, with the herd quiet and the watch holding, a man can feel both terribly exposed and strangely at peace, as if the whole world has been reduced to horse, cattle, stars, and the simple duty of staying awake until morning. Then morning begins. Not all at once. First, as a thinning along the eastern edge of the land, then a pale gray that separates earth from sky. The stars nearest the horizon fade. The cattle stir. One rises, then another. Somewhere behind you, camp has not yet woken, but the night is already loosening. Relief comes with it, though not gently, because by dawn, the cruelest part was that the work did not care how little you had slept. By midday, word has already passed quietly through the outfit that there is a river ahead. No one says much when the news first arrives. Cowboys are not given to wasting fear before fear proves necessary. Still, something in the whole drive changes almost at once. Not visibly to a town eye, perhaps, but in the smaller ways that matter more on the trail. Men sit a little straighter in the saddle. The trail boss stops looking only at the herd and starts studying the land ahead. Riders on point grow more attentive to the shape of the ground. Even the casual bits of camp humor that sometimes survive into late morning fade a little, as if the day has narrowed and all unnecessary words have slipped off its edges. A river crossing does that. Not because it is always disaster. Most are not. But because every man on a drive knows that water is different from dust, heat, or distance. Dust wears you down. Heat empties you by degrees. Distance asks only patience. A river asks for judgment all at once. It asks it from horse, rider, herd, and trail boss together. And if any one of them gives the wrong answer at the wrong moment, the whole crossing can begin to come apart with frightening speed. The landscape begins to change before the water comes into view. The long open prairie gives way to gentler rolls in the land, and then to greener patches where the earth holds more moisture. Cottonwoods begin to appear in the distance, then willows, then heavier growth along a low cut in the land where the river must be running, even before you can see the gleam of it. The grass is thicker here. The air carries a different smell too. Damp earth beneath the dust, mud beneath the heat, something cooler running below the afternoon. The cattle sense it before the men say anything aloud. Their pace changes. Heads lift. The line grows a little more eager, less resistant, as thirst and instinct draw them forward. That eagerness might help if controlled, or room in everything if it turns into crowding at the bank. So the riders begin working harder, even while the herd seems, to an outsider, to be moving well enough on its own. That is the trouble with trail work. The more skill is required, the less dramatic it often looks from a distance. Ahead, 2 scouts return at last. They do not come back at a gallop or in any kind of scene-making urgency. They ride in steadily, faces serious, horses damp from the quick out and back. The trail boss pulls aside with them and listens, while the rest of the herd continues easing forward under reduced pace. No one nearby strains too obviously to hear, but everyone does. The report passes through the outfit in fragments. The river is running high. The current is strong. The usual crossing is bad. There is a better entry point downstream. That last part matters most. A crossing can be made dangerous by depth, yes, but also by the banks that lead into and out of it. A steep, muddy entry means frightened cattle and slipping horses before the hard part has even begun. A bad exit means exhausted animals bunching at the far side, blocking one another while the current continues to press the herd from behind. A good crossing point is never simply a place where water is shallow. It is a place where difficulty can be managed. The trail boss chooses quickly. He always must. Delay near water makes cattle restless and riders worse. The herd is angled away from the obvious approach and guided instead toward a lower, wider stretch where the banks slope more gently and the river, though still broad and brown, looks at least possible. No one says it looks safe. Safe is too large a word for moving 2,000 cattle through running water. But possible will do. The outfit begins to prepare. That preparation is not loud or frantic. It is practical. Riders check cinches and reins again. Rope coils are adjusted. Men who would normally ride other positions shift where needed. The more experienced hands moving closer to where the crossing may break if it breaks at all. The trail boss gives orders in the same voice he uses for everything else, because on a cattle drive, calm is a tool no less important than leather or rope. Keep them tight on approach. Give them room in the water. No shouting unless you need it. Watch the bunching. Watch the far bank. You are placed near the front. Not fully alone, not carrying the whole crossing on your shoulders, but close enough to feel the weight of being trusted with the first movement into the river. That is how trail work often rewards competence, not with praise, but with harder jobs. Beside you rides a vaquero whose face seems carved from patience itself. He says little, only glances once toward the river and then toward you. The kind of look working men exchange when words would add nothing useful. By the time the herd nears the bank, the river is fully visible. From a distance, it had seemed broad but manageable, a long ribbon of brown water under the afternoon light. Up close, its force becomes easier to read. The surface is not smooth after all. It carries small twists, quick dark pulls, drifting branches, places where the current tightens and hurries as if the river were thinking faster there. Water is opaque with silt, which means depth cannot be judged by looking. Everything beneath the surface must be learned by entering it. The cattle hesitate. Of course they do. The first ranks bunch a little at the smell and movement of the water, their bodies pushing up behind their own uncertainty. A Longhorn will cross if it believes the thing can be done, or if the pressure behind it allows no better option. But belief matters. The first few animals must enter without turning back. If they lose confidence too early, the whole herd can fold sideways into confusion. So the riders begin shaping the moment before it hardens. Point men angle outward. Flank riders press in. Gently. The line behind tightens without crowding. Horses step near the led cattle, not threatening them, only occupying the right pieces of space. You feel your own horse beneath you become more careful now, more aware of footing, scent, and the nervous energy running through the animals ahead. The lead steer steps down first. Mud gives slightly under his weight, then holds. Water climbs over hoof, fetlock, shin. He pauses, thinking. Another animal presses close behind. A rider edges just near enough to remove the possibility of retreat. The steer takes another step, then another. That is all it takes. The first movement becomes permission for the rest. You nudge your horse forward, speaking low to him, though the words matter less than the tone. The bank drops more quickly than you hoped. Cool water closes around the horse's legs, then knees, then belly. He does not like it, but he keeps going. Behind you, the first cattle are entering in earnest now, their horns rising above the dark churn of the water, their eyes wide but their bodies committed. The whole crossing has begun. The current is stronger than it looked from shore. It presses from the side, not with a theatrical violence, but with relentless intention. Your horse leans into it. Each step becomes uncertain for a moment before finding ground again. Then the bottom falls away, and he is no longer stepping but swimming. The shift comes suddenly enough to pull at your balance. Water climbs cold against your legs. The saddle lifts and moves differently under you now, no longer anchored by stride, but by the rolling effort of a horse trying to hold direction in moving water. You do not think about falling. That is not because it cannot happen. It can. It has, to men you have known, and men whose names are still spoken in camp talk, years after the bodies were buried or never found. But in the middle of a crossing, fear must be trimmed down to usefulness. There is only the next correction, the next line to hold, the next judgment. You keep your horse angled toward the far bank, not straight across. Straight across is for still water. In current, a rider must allow for being carried. The horse swims hard, shoulders lifting and sinking beneath you, nostrils wide, breath coming rougher now. Around and behind, the crossing has become a scene of controlled disorder. Cattle crowd the water in groups and then open again. Some swim. Some lunge for footing too early and lose it. Riders move among them in wide arcs, turning a panicked head here, giving space there, preventing one bad line from becoming many. A steer downstream bellows sharply and goes broadside to the current. For one dangerous moment, its body threatens to become an obstacle for others behind it. A rider closes in, not with heroics, but with practiced pressure, horse against horn, angle against panic, guiding the animal's head until it finds its line again. Another beast stumbles at the shallows and nearly goes under another's chest. A rope flashes somewhere to your left, then disappears into spray and muddy water. No one has time to admire competence in moments like this. The crossing demands more of it immediately. Halfway across, the current takes hold harder. You feel it first in the way your horse labors, then in the way the far bank seems to slide slower toward you than it should. The water presses at your legs with a force that feels personal. The horse's neck strains. Once, twice, his body drifts lower downstream than you wanted before he fights himself back into the line. Your reins are not there to command so much as to agree with his effort and shape it. This is not a moment for domination. It is a moment for partnership and trust. That is what people misunderstand about trail skill. The work that saves you rarely looks like bravery from the inside. It looks like doing the next right thing without adding panic to what is already difficult. The horse swims. You stay balanced. The line is kept. The far bank remains the goal. Around you the herd continues its great awkward crossing. Not graceful, never graceful, but moving. Horns rise and fall. Water churns brown around dark bodies. Men shout only when they must. The river sounds larger now than it did from shore, not because it has grown, but because you are in it. Hooves strike hidden stones. A branch spins past. A frightened animal turns its head too sharply and is turned back. The whole scene is full of danger, yet shaped by work so practiced that the danger does not become chaos. Then the bottom comes back. At first, only in touches. A hoof scraping gravel. Another step half swimming, half finding purchase. Then suddenly your horse is no longer fighting to float, but fighting to climb. Water drops from belly to knees to fetlocks. He surges upward with all the weary determination left in him and pulls you out of the strongest current onto the shallows of the far side. The bank is slicker than it looked. Your horse slips once, catches himself, and lunges again. Mud sucks at the hooves. Gravel shifts. For a second, the whole crossing seems ready to continue its argument right there at the edge. Then he finds better footing, gathers himself, and climbs clear. Water streams from saddle leather, from stirrup, from his darkened coat. You breathe only once you are properly out, and even then not fully, because much of the herd remains behind you. So you turn at once to face the river again. This is another thing the work allows no romance about. Your own safe passage means almost nothing until the crossing as a whole has held. Beside you, the Vocacaro has cleared the water too. A few other riders gather near the exit point, ready to push back in if needed, ready to turn animals up the bank, ready to make space where the herd threatens to crowd itself into trouble. The crossing goes on, minute after minute, beast after beast, man after man. From the bank, the scale of it is almost stranger than being in the middle. The river is full of horns and backs and moving water and tired horses carrying tired men through one necessary difficulty after another. A few cattle are swept farther downstream than anyone would like before regaining direction. One horse stumbles badly enough near the far side to send his rider half out of the saddle, but both recover. Another pair emerge shaking and blown but upright. Loss is possible in every crossing, sometimes expected. Today, the river seems willing to take less than it might have. At last, the last of the herd clears. The final cattle come up the bank mud-streaked and exhausted, water dripping from hide and horn. The last riders follow after them. The trail boss himself is among the last to leave the river, as though unwilling to declare the crossing finished, until he has seen with his own eyes that the outfit, the horses, and nearly all the herd are through. When he reaches the bank, no one cheers. Cowboys do not waste triumph that way. But something in the whole outfit loosens. Shoulders drop, breaths lengthen, voices return in quieter forms. The crossing is done, and the day, which had narrowed itself so hard around water and current and control, begins to widen again. Not into comfort, not that quickly, but into the more ordinary burdens of the trail, which after real danger can almost feel merciful in their familiarity. Water drips from tack in steady little rhythms. Horses stand with heads low, sides working hard. Mud dries slowly on boots and hems. The cattle, once urged farther from the bank, begin to settle into movement again as though nothing extraordinary has happened at all. That is often how trail life works. A difficult thing rises. It demands everything for an hour. Then if you are lucky, the world closes over it and asks you simply to continue. On a cattle drive, danger rarely looked dramatic from afar. It looked like one wrong step in moving water. The river behind you still runs brown and full, but already it belongs to the past tense of the day. Ahead lies more ground, more dust, more work, and somewhere beyond that, the growing promise of town. For now, though, it is enough that the herd is through, the horses are standing, and the outfit carries that quiet satisfaction working men allow themselves when skill has held and luck has not betrayed it. The air feels cooler after the water, the light a little softer, the body emptier, and after danger past, the trail returned to its old bargain. More work, more dust, and one more promise of town ahead. In the last days before Abilene, the whole drive begins to lean forward. Not faster. Exactly. The cattle still move at the same measured pace the trail boss demands, and the work remains the work. Dust, riding, watching. But something changes in the men. It shows itself in smaller ways first. A little more talk at breakfast. A little more life in tired eyes. A few more guesses thrown toward the horizon whenever the land opens wide enough to invite them. Abilene is still not visible, but it has begun to exist in the mind, and sometimes that is enough to lighten a man before anything in the world has actually improved. Town does that. Not the reality of it at first. The idea of it. A bed. A bath. A meal that did not come from a chuck wagon. A barber's chair. A glass of whiskey. A room with walls. The possibility of being still without listening for cattle. These things grow more vivid the closer the drive comes to its end. Men who, a week earlier, had little spare energy for imagination, now spend part of their fatigue on anticipation. One talks about steak, another talks about cards, another wants only hot water and sleep. Even the trail boss, who would never admit to looking forward to anything so soft, seems slightly less carved out of weather than usual. The herd knows nothing of this, of course. The cattle move because they are moved. They do not understand railheads, stockyards, wages, or the difference between open country and town. Their world remains grass, thirst, dust, pressure, and relief. But the riders begin to feel civilization gathering ahead of them like a different climate. The land itself changes too. Fences appear where before there had only been horizon. Wagon tracks cross the trail more often. Farmhouses sit at distances that would have seemed crowded not long ago. The West, even here, has already begun learning how to close itself. At night, conversation around the fire shifts. Less about tomorrow's water, more about Abilene. Someone says he's going first to the bathhouse, and then nowhere else until he has washed 3 weeks of trail off his skin. Another swears he will eat enough meat in one sitting to make up for every bean he ever swallowed north of Texas. One of the younger hands asks whether the Long Branch is really as noisy as people claim, and the older man answers in ways that suggest exaggeration. Is part of the pleasure. A town at the end of a drive is not merely a destination. It is a reward built partly from memory and partly from hunger. By the time smoke from the locomotives is first spotted in the distance, the men are already half living there. The last morning on the trail feels unlike the others, though in many ways it begins the same. Coffee, saddles, dust, the herd moving under a pale sky. But underneath the routine lies a current of release, held tightly in check. No one wants to lose cattle on the final push. No one wants to arrive looking careless. So the drive keeps its shape even as the men feel their imaginations run ahead towards streets, lamps, whiskey, mattresses, and money in the hair. Then, at last, Abilene comes into view. Not all at once. First as interruptions in the land, structures, fencing, movement too organized to belong to the open prairie. Then more clearly, the stockyards, the line of the town itself, the low spread of buildings gathered around commerce, appetite, and opportunity. Beyond that, the railroad. The very thing the whole drive has been aimed toward. After weeks of sleeping on the ground and pushing Longhorns north through weather, mud, dust, and monotony, the town looks almost unnatural in its concentration. Too many walls, too many roofs, too many signs that human beings have chosen to live close together on purpose. The sounds reach you before the details fully settle. Wagons rolling, voices layered over other voices, a whistle from the rail line, dogs hammering, the dense collective noise of people whose work is done among buildings rather than under sky. For a cowboy fresh off the trail, town is not merely different, it is almost excessive. Even the air changes. Less grass, more coal smoke, horse manure, cooking grease, mud, whiskey, perfume, wood, and bodies. A town's smell is never one thing. It is accumulation, civilization, if you like, but with all its appetites crowded together in one place. After weeks of clean distances and cattle stink, the sheer variety of it feels nearly luxurious. Still, the drive is not over until the herd is delivered. That final push requires care. Cattle, already restless from the new sounds in close quarters, must be kept moving cleanly toward the stockyards. Riders tighten up, voices sharpen slightly. The herd feels the change in atmosphere and responds with its usual mixture of suspicion and momentum. A steer throws its head at the sound of a locomotive whistle. Another presses sideways at the edge of the line. A rider cuts it back. The stockyard gates loom ahead, wide enough to accept the drive, narrow enough to make a man's pulse pick up until the last animal is safely through. Then, suddenly, it is done. The herd passes into the pens. The gates close. And the work, this particular work, this long dusty northbound stretch of it, falls away all at once. There is always a strange emptiness in that moment. For weeks every day has been structured by cattle. Wake for them, ride for them, watch for them, lose sleep for them, fear for them, follow water for them, count weather by what it might do to them. Then, in a matter of minutes, they become someone else's responsibility, and a cowboy's left holding the outline of his own fatigue, like a man just told he can set down a burden he had grown used to carry. The trail boss handles the papers. Numbers are checked. Heads are counted. A stockyard man says something dry and businesslike. Another scratches figures into a ledger. Cowboys wait nearby in that half-loose posture of men who have not yet fully accepted that the drive no longer owns their next hour. Then comes the thing every working man on the trail has imagined in one form or another: pay. It is not a fortune. It was never going to be. Wages for a cattle drive do not arrive wrapped in grandeur. They come folded, counted, and plain, carrying none of the romance later generations would attach to the work that earned them. But when the money is placed into your hand, it has a weight greater than its actual size. Not because it is large, but because it proves the hardship existed in the material world. Weeks of dust and bad sleep and saddle ache and danger have turned into something you can tuck into a pocket. Even then, the reward is practical before it is celebratory. Horse first. The livery stable takes your attention before the saloon does, because the gelding that carried you here deserves more than being tied off and forgotten while you rush toward town pleasures. You lead him through streets busier than any place he has seen in weeks, and his ears work the whole way, catching wagon noise, voices, banging doors, other horses, the confusion of close human life. At the stable, the smells are sharp and layered. Hay, manure, oiled leather, damp wood, grain. Men move among the stalls with the brisk competence of those who understand that cowboys may squander wages on many things, but not usually on the care of a good horse. You see him settle before you think much of yourself. Water, dog, feed, a rub down, a stall that feels almost sheltered after the long exposure of the trail. Only then does your own body rise properly into awareness again. You are filthy, not in a poetic sense, in a real one. Dust caked into the neckband of your shirt, sweat dried and re-dried into the cloth, beard rough, hair full of trail grit, skin carrying the long stale memory of horses, smoke, leather, and sun. Every decent pleasure in town begins with the same realization that before you can enjoy civilization, you must remove the trail from your body. So you go to the bathhouse. If heaven had a smell for a man off a cattle drive, it might smell something like hot water and soap. The room is warm in a way the prairie never is. Enclosed warmth, held warmth, warmth that does not blow away in the wind. Steam hangs in the air. Towels, basins, the sound of water poured and stirred and struck by human hands. You undress with the slight awkwardness of a man who has been living half in public for too long, and when you finally lower yourself into the bath, this sensation is almost too much to interpret at first. Heat, water, stillness. The trail has made your body so accustomed to managing discomfort that relief feels almost suspicious. Dirt loosens from your skin in cloudy swirls. The soreness in your back and thighs does not disappear, but it changes shape under the heat, becoming something less sharp, more bearable. Your shoulders drop. Your breathing deepens. The whole day, and all the days before it, seem for a few moments to slide off you in layers. After the bath, the barber. The chair itself feels like luxury, to sit and be still while another man concerns himself with your face and hair, as if your appearance were worth tending. The razor moves. The towel presses warm against your skin. Hair falls away. Beard follows. When you stand again, cleaner and lighter, you look not like a different man exactly, but like the man you might have been if the trail had not spent weeks riding itself across you. A clean shirt completes the illusion. Fresh cloth against washed skin. A collar not already stiffened by sweat. Sleeves that smell of store shelves instead of camp smoke. This is one of the sharpest contrasts town offers. On the trail, a man becomes part of the same material world as horse, rope, and dust. In town, he is invited briefly to recover separateness, to become a person again rather than a function. Then, food. Real food. Not because chuck wagon meals were false, but because they belong to necessity. Town food belongs, at least a little, to pleasure. Steak.io. Potatoes. Bread soft enough not to need fighting. Butter. Maybe pie. If the wages and appetite allow. Even the room where such a meal is eaten feels strange after the prairie. Walls close in the senses. Lamps burn steadily. Plates are thicker than tin. Knives and forks answer one another with cleaner sounds. Other people sit near enough to overhear, which is its own kind of strangeness after so much space. The first bite of good meat after a long drive can feel almost emotional. Not because it is refined, but because it is abundant in the right ways. Hot, rich, soft, immediate. Your body, which has been asking only for what it needs, suddenly remembers that wanting can be something gentler than survival. After food comes whiskey, or beer, or simply the possibility of sitting somewhere noisy and not needing to rise in the dark to circle a hurt. The saloon delivers its own kind of overload. Piano music, voices stacked on voices, glasses, laughter too loud in enclosed air, smoke curling toward the ceiling, perfume and sweat and spilled drink. Cowboys from other drives, trail-worn in different ways, all briefly transformed by money in their pockets, and the knowledge that for one night at least the herd belongs to someone else. Abilene is full of performances, and not all of them are dishonest. Men who were almost mute on the trail become talkative over a bottle. Old stories grow larger at a table than they ever did under the stars. A hand, who seemed carved from silence out on the prairie, may prove to have a quick wit. In lamplight, once the dust is washed off, and food is in him, even fatigue changes. In town, it becomes loose, expansive, social, something shared rather than endured alone. And yet there is always a slight distance in the pleasure. That is the part people forget. A cowboy in town is never fully a townsman. The streets feel crowded, walls too close. The mirror in the barber's shop shows a face your own body barely feels responsible for. Even the soft bed waiting later in the hotel room or boarding house can feel almost suspicious after so many nights on the ground. Comfort arrives, yes, but it arrives as a visitor, not as something that belongs to you. For a cowboy, town was less a homecoming than a brief permission to feel human again. That is why the reward at the end of the drive is real, but never complete. The bath is real. The steak is real. The whiskey is real. The clean sheets are real. But they are temporary. Late in the evening, after saloon noise and laughter and the overwhelming density of town life, you return at last to a room with a bed. The mattress receives you with a softness so unfamiliar it almost feels incorrect. The sheets smell of soap and linen and indoor air. For a moment you lie there in the quiet after the piano, after the voices, after the smoke and lamplight, listening to the muffled town beyond the wall, and feeling the strange absence of open sky above you. You should sleep at once. Often you do not, because relief can be nearly as unsettling as hardship when it comes too suddenly. The room is still. The bed is warm. Your body is clean. No one will wake you for first watch. No horses breathing just beyond the firelight. No herd is shifting in the dark. It is what you wanted all along, and yet part of you remains half listening for the life you just left. Then, slowly, the body yields. The heat of the bath lingers. The whiskey settles. The ache in the hips and back dulls into something almost restful. The pillow stops feeling strange. The mattress becomes real beneath you. And in that quiet, with the dust washed off and the trail for one night held outside the room, the reward seems almost complete. Almost. But once the dust washed off and the money changed hands, the old question returned. What exactly had all that hardship bought you? By the second day in town, the glamour has already begun to thin, not to vanish entirely. Abilene still knows how to perform itself. The saloons still throw light and piano music out into the street. Glass still catches lamplight and amber flashes. Laughter still rises too easily from men who only yesterday were too tired to waste breath on anything but coffee and instructions. Women in bright dresses still move through smoke and conversation with the well-practiced ease of people who understand that a cattle town is built as much on longing as on livestock. From the boardwalk, in the right mood, a man could almost believe this was what the whole trail had been leading toward. But the second look is always different from the first. The first look belongs to relief. The second belongs to truth. Now that the bath is over, the clean shirt has lost its novelty, and the first hunger for whiskey and noise has quieted. Town begins to show itself less as reward than as interruption. Pleasures are here, yes, but they are measured in coins and hours. The steak is eaten and gone. The bath cools into memory. The whiskey leaves a dullness behind it. Even the soft bed, so miraculous the first night, becomes by the next evening simply another rented thing a man may enjoy only until his money or his luck runs out. That is one of the first cracks in the cowboy fantasy. The life looks glamorous only when its rewards are imagined and its costs are forgotten. Out on the trail, you had time to think about town as though it were an answer. In town, you begin to understand that it is mostly a pause. The wages in your pocket are real enough, but not large. A cowboy's pay sounds respectable only to those who have never done the arithmetic. Food, lodging, drink, tobacco, laundry, tack repairs, a haircut, a new shirt, perhaps a little money sent home, perhaps a little set aside for winter. By the time a man has touched the edges of comfort, his wages are already beginning to shrink into ordinary sums again. No one becomes rich on endurance alone. That too later generations would blur. They would keep the horse, the hat, the revolver, the horizon. They would forget the low wages, the saddle sores, the bad coffee, the split lips, the hard ground, and the fact that most cowboys were working men paid just enough to keep right. The town itself helps create the myth, though not intentionally. In a saloon, with dust washed off and a drink in hand, a cowboy looks more like a legend than he ever does at dawn on the prairie, shaking a scorpion out of his boot. Lamplight is kind to rough faces. Music is kind to fatigue. Whiskey is kind to memory. A man who spent 3 weeks coughing dust and sleeping in fragments can, for an evening, appear as though he has chosen hardship for the romance of it, rather than endured it, because it was the work available to him, and he was good at it. That is how legend begins. Not with lies exactly. With selection. Keep the bravery. Lose the monotony. Keep the open sky. Lose the bad pay. Keep the horse. Lose the aching hips. Keep the danger in short dramatic bursts. Lose the endless hours in between, when nothing happens except discomfort and the need to stay competent. By now you can see that even the famous saloons are full less of glamorous men than of tired ones temporarily disguised by civilization. Some drink because they are celebratory. Some because the body is still buzzing from the trail and does not know how else to come down. Some because cards, noise, and women make a better answer to loneliness than a quiet room does. Others sit more quietly than the legends would allow, nursing one glass for a long time, not because they are mysterious, but because they are counting what they can afford and how many days remain before they must choose work again. There are gun belts, yes. There are hard faces, yes. But the true texture of the room is not danger. It is transience. No one entirely belongs here. Not the cattle buyers from the east. Not the barkeep pretending order is more stable than it is. Not the women making a living out of attention. And not the cowboys either, who arrive with dust still hidden in the seams of their gear and leave again as soon as money thins or work appears elsewhere. The older hands understand this best. They do not mistake town for home, only for relief. They know that the pleasures are temporary because they themselves are temporary. A cattle town exists in the brief overlap between herds, seasons, rail schedules, wages, appetite, and weather. Everything in it feels both vivid and unstable, as if it could all loosen and scatter with the next economic shift, the next rail spur, the next winter, the next change in the shape of the West. That instability belongs to cowboy life as much as horses do. A cowboy does not live inside a settled story. He moves between episodes of labor, a drive, a town, a ranch job, a winter somewhere harsher than planned, another contract, another outfit, another trail north. Later, People would simplify this life into types: outlaw, gunslinger, lone rider, man of the frontier. But most cowboys were neither romantic loners nor theatrical lawbreakers. They were workers inside a demanding system of cattle, land, distance, and weather. Their great virtues were not usually glamour or violence. They were usefulness, reliability, nerve, horsemanship, thought, the ability to stay awake when exhausted, to handle stock without panic, to do bad paid work well enough that other men would hire them again. That reality is less shiny than myth. It is also more interesting, because real hardship leaves behind a more durable shape than fantasy does. A cowboy who rides through dust for weeks, sleeps in fragments, crosses swollen rivers, tends horses before himself, and still gets the herd to market has done something larger than perform masculinity in a hat. He has survived a repetitive, difficult occupation that most romantic storytellers would have found too dull to tell honestly. And that is exactly why the myth grew. The cowboy became a legend not because the life was glamorous, but because it was hard enough to survive and simple enough to romanticize later. The simplicity matters. From far away, the life resolves into a few bold shapes: man, horse, horizon, danger, freedom. The mind likes such clean arrangements. It especially likes them after the fact. Once the smells, aches, low wages, foul weather, cracked hands, and mundane humiliations have faded. Hard lives are often remembered as elegant only when the details that made them difficult are stripped away. But the details are the truth. The long ride in bad heat, the watered coffee, the beans again, the rough blanket, the horse's sore shoulder, the fear of being useless, the need to keep going even when the body no longer argued, because arguing would take more energy than endurance. By evening, town grows quieter in a different way than the trail ever did. The street outside your room still carries sound: wagon wheels, laughter from farther off, a piano in some saloon still working late, boots on the boardwalk, a train whistle somewhere beyond it all. But through a closed door and a washed body, those sounds lose their urgency. They become evidence of life going on nearby, not demands made on your own tiredness. You sit with your boots off and feel the odd softness of stillness. No herd waiting, no watch assigned, no horse needing water before you can sleep. And in that quiet, the glamour goes thinner still until what remains of cowboy life is something both plainer and sadder than the stories ever admit. Not failure, not fraud, just a hard occupation later polished into symbolism by people who wanted the West to mean something simpler than work. Out in the street, someone laughs too loudly. Then the sound passes. Then only the low murmur of town remains. And beneath that legend, many cowboys carried a quieter truth. They belonged almost everywhere for a while, and nowhere for long. The next morning, a letter waits for you. Not because town has suddenly become intimate, but because the post office holds these small collisions between moving lives and fixed addresses. The paper is worn at the edges from travel and handling, the handwriting familiar enough to tighten something in your chest before you have even broken the seal. A mother, perhaps. A sister. Someone back east or south, or in a town too settled to imagine the exact shape of your days, but close enough to blood to keep writing into your absence. You take it somewhere quieter to read. Not the saloon. Not the street. Somewhere with a bench or a patch of shade, or simply enough space that another man's conversation will not settle on top of the words. Around you, Abilene continues its business. Wagons pass. Men unload goods. Shop doors open. Horses clatter over packed earth and boardwalk edges. The town is alive in the practical way towns always are, with errands, deliveries, commerce, repairs. Civilization does not pause because one cowboy has found a letter with home folded inside it. The words are ordinary. That is what makes them powerful. News of weather, news of crops, a small illness overcome, a neighbor married, hasn't moved. A question about whether you are well. A hope that you are being careful. A line or two that says nothing directly about missing you, and therefore says it all the more plainly. When you fold the letter again, the town around you feels altered, not because anything has changed, but because memory has entered it. Home does that. It lays one landscape over another. For a little while, the street outside the post office sits strangely beside another place entirely. A farm lane, perhaps, or a yard, or a kitchen table, or a room with curtains and weather, measured from a doorway instead of from the back of a horse. You belong to neither place fully now. That is the quiet truth underneath the cowboy life, the one hidden even more deeply than the low wages and the discomfort. Men like this move constantly enough that belonging thins around them. Home becomes distant, but still powerful. Town is vivid, but temporary. The trail feels real in the body, but unstable in every other way. Work is wherever the next herd, ranch, season, or contract requires it to be. So the day fills with practical errands. A visit to the mercantile for tobacco, socks, perhaps a new bandana, perhaps cartridges if money allows. A stop at the gunsmith to have a revolver cleaned or checked, less for drama than because a working weapon is part of a working life. Time at the livery stable, where the horse looks calmer than you feel, chewing hay as if towns and wages and futures are questions too abstract to deserve his concern. A trip to the barber or bootmaker, not because vanity has suddenly bloomed, but because maintenance is easier done in town than regretted later on the trail. These errands might seem small, but they carry the shape of cowboy existence better than larger legends do. A man is always preparing to leave, even while he has only just arrived. That is the texture of the life. Not settlement, but turnover. One outfit ends, another may begin. One trail is completed, another is already rumored west or north. A town offers services because men like you are passing through it, but its very usefulness reminds you that passing through is exactly what you are doing. At some point, someone asks what comes next. That question shadows every cattle town once the first relief has worn off. Some men know their answer already. They will ride south again with the remuda and the wagon. Others will sign on at a ranch for winter work if they can get it. Some will drift toward another territory following hearsay about wages, grass, horses, or bosses less stingy than the last. A few will lose enough of their pay to whiskey and cards that the next step will be decided for them by necessity rather than intention. You are not always sure yourself. That uncertainty is another kind of loneliness, though not a tragic one. More like a permanent weather system of the life. You carry your skills with you, riding, roping, night watch, reading cattle, enduring bad coffee and worse sleep. And because you carry them, you know you can make yourself useful elsewhere. But usefulness is not the same as rootedness. A man can be employable in many places, and at home in none of them. By afternoon, the town seems slower. Not literally. Abilene still moves with its own noise and appetite. But your own excitement has thinned into observation. You notice the way businessmen from the east look at the yards and stock with calculation rather than fatigue. The way shopkeepers know a cowboy's money burns hotter in the first days after a drive than in the last. The way saloons sell not only liquor, but temporary versions of selfhood, boldness, ease, company, forgetting. The way the whole town is structured around men who are always about to arrive or about to leave. That is when the thought comes more clearly. The trail may be hard, but town is borrowed. On the trail, everything hurts. But at least the purpose is plain. In town, comfort returns, yet so does uncertainty of another kind. What now? Where next? How long until the money thins? Which boss? Which route? Which season? Whether to stay close to the work you know, or risk a different one. Civilization gives options, but options can be their own fatigue when a man is used to having the next necessary thing decided by cattle, weather, and the trail boss's voice. As evening comes on again, The streets take on that softer frontier hushed beneath the noise. Lamps light. A train calls from somewhere beyond the yards. The boardwalk's cool. Shopkeepers pull doors in. Saloon pianos begin their second life of the day. You return to your room, or your rented corner of quiet, with purchases wrapped in paper, a letter in your pocket, and the peculiar feeling that the day has been full without being decisive. The room holds you differently now. Last night it felt miraculous. Tonight it feels temporary. Boots off. Lamp lit. D. The clean shirt folded over a chair. The letter laid beside the washstand or tucked carefully away. Through the window or the thin wall come the sounds of Abilene reduced by distance. A voice, a wagon, a laugh. Then a whistle far off in the dark. Civilization at a slight remove. You sit for a while without moving, thinking, perhaps, of home. Thinking, perhaps, of the trail. Thinking, perhaps, of nothing so shaped as thought at all, only feeling the odd suspension of being between one life and the next. This is where the cowboy myth thins into something more human than legend usually permits. Freedom, yes, there is freedom here, a kind of it. No fixed office, no settled street, no single employer forever. A man can choose west, north, south, ranch, drive, wages, weather, risk. But loneliness runs through that freedom like a second strand through rope. The more a man belongs to motion, the less he belongs in the ordinary ways elsewhere. The cowboy life offered freedom, but it rarely offered belonging in the ordinary sense of the word. That is why the quietest hours in town can feel stranger than the hardest hours on the trail. Difficulty is easier to understand than drift. Pain is easier to name than uncertainty. Out under the stars, a man knows what he must do next. In a rented room with lamplight and a little money left, the question opens wider. Outside, a train whistle sounds again, long and lonely across the dark. Somewhere down the street, a door closes. Then, another. Then the town settles by degrees. And even as men like these kept riding north and west, the world that made them possible was already beginning to disappear. When you leave town, the road feels wider than it did when you came in. Perhaps that is only because you are alone with it again. Abilene falls behind in slow pieces. First the stockyards, then the clustered roofs, then the smoke, then the thin, restless noise of wagons, voices, and commerce. Before long, there is only open country once more, your horse beneath you, and the old familiar distance spreading outward on every side. Town had offered its brief gifts: hot water, clean linen, whiskey, steak, a softer bed than the trail had any right to imagine. But already those things are beginning to feel less like a new life than like a pause inside the old one. That was often the shape of a cowboy's reward, real enough to be enjoyed, too brief to be mistaken for belonging. So you ride on. The air opens as the buildings disappear. The smells of coal smoke, beer, soap, damp wood, and crowded stables fade behind you, replaced once more by grass, dust, leather, and weather. The horse settles into a steady working rhythm, and your own body, though it has tasted comfort, begins to understand the saddle again more quickly than seems fair. That is one of the quieter truths of the life. Hardship may never become pleasant, but it can become familiar enough that the body returns to it, like a hand returns to an old tool. Ahead lies uncertain work, a ranch perhaps, another drive, another outfit, another season of wages too small and labor too large. The future does not arrive to a cowboy as a plan set in order. It arrives as rumor, direction, chance, weather, and the willingness to keep moving until one heart. Joe becomes the next. There is freedom in that, yes, but not the shining kind stories. Like Best, it is a more practical freedom, tied to uncertainty, to restlessness, and to theft. Fact that a man who owns little can move quickly when the world changes around him. And the world was changing. Even while men like these were still riding the long trails north, the conditions that had made their work necessary were already beginning to thin. Railroads pushed farther out. More cattle could be loaded closer to where they were raised. More land was fenced. Barbed wire turned open range into measured property. Towns hardened. Routes shortened. The wide, unsettled spaces that had once allowed great drives to happen began, year by year, to close their hands. It did not happen all at once. That is what history so often feels like from inside it. Not a door shutting, but a landscape gradually rearranging itself until one day the old life no longer fits as naturally inside it. A fence where there had been none. A railhead moved farther south. A contract changed. A winter harsher than expected. One less drive. One more ranch using different methods. The cowboy era did not vanish in a single dramatic gesture. It narrowed. And perhaps because it narrowed so quickly, memory began polishing it almost immediately. Later generations would remember the horse, the hat, the horizon, the revolver, the firelight, the long ride into sunset. They would remember freedom. They would remember style. They would remember danger in short, bright flashes, the kind that fit easily into story. What faded more quickly were the slower truths, the bad coffee, the split lips, the poor sleep, the low wages, the way a body could ache for weeks without ever fully recovering, the way most of the work was not heroic at all, but repetitive, patient, and necessary. Yet even the myth, softened and polished as it became, kept hold of something real, because there was something real there. Not glamour, not ease, not even adventure most of the time. What later generations remembered as freedom was, for the men living it, mostly work, dust, danger, and a stubborn kind of dignity. That dignity matters. It lived in small things more than grand ones. In a cowboy checking his horse before he touched his own supper. In a rider staying calm at the edge of a river while the current argued with horseflesh and fear. In a man waking for night, watch when his body had not had enough sleep to deserve the name of rest. In the quiet competence that kept a herd moving north, not through brilliance or theater, but through the same hard decisions made correctly again and again. That kind of life is easy to oversimplify later, but perhaps the real story is gentler than the legend and deeper too, because the cowboy was not memorable only as an image. He was memorable as a working man who lived close to essentials. Weather, animals, hunger, water, distance, fatigue, companionship that did not always speak its own tenderness aloud, purpose that was narrow but unmistakable, a day that asked much and explained little. There is a severe beauty in that, not because hardship is beautiful while it is being lived. Most hardship is simply exhausting, but because endurance, when remembered honestly, has a shape of its own. The open land, the campfire at dusk, the low song around bedded cattle, the horse grazing in darkness after a long day. These things do not become moving because they were easy. They become moving because men carried on inside them anyway. By evening, the town is far enough behind that even its memory has softened. You find a place to stop where the land offers what little it can. Some water, some grass, enough shelter from the wind to make a fire worth the trouble. The routines return without needing to be thought through. Saddle off, horse watered, bedroll spread, tin cup in hand. A small meal if you have it. The work of ending the day is quieter than the work that filled it, but no less real. Soon the fire burns lower. The light leaves the ground by degrees. First the gold, then the gray, then only shape and outline. Your horse stands a little way off with his head down in the grass, tearing at it slowly, content for the moment with feet and dark and the absence of demands. The last orange in the west fades. Overhead the stars begin to gather, one at a time, then many at once, until the sky feels again like the oldest roof a man can know. This is where the story ought to end. Not in a gunfight, not in a cheer, not in the noisy certainty of a legend fully formed, but here, with embers, with grass, with horse breath in the dark, with the open land stretching farther than any town can hold. The cowboy, in this light, becomes smaller and truer, No longer the polished symbol later generations would hang so many meanings upon, but a tired working figure at the end of a day, held between hardship and rest, between a vanishing world and the memory that will outlast. And perhaps that is enough. Enough to know that the life was harder than the stories admitted. Enough to know that the stories kept some fragment of truth anyway. Enough to understand that what made the cowboy memorable was not that he lived beautifully, but that he endured beautifully when he had to. The fire settles lower still. The saddle waits near your head. The blanket holds what warmth it can. The horse goes on grazing. The stars turn slowly over everything. And in that stillness, the cowboy is no longer just a myth of the American West, but a quiet reminder that the hardest lives sometimes leave the softest echoes. So let the night widen. Let the embers sink. Let the open land keep its silence. Somewhere behind you, the railroad goes on carrying its freight east. Somewhere fences continue their patient work of changing the country. Somewhere towns are growing, and the old drives are already becoming story. But here, under the stars, another truth remains for a little while longer. A man, a horse, a fire gone almost to ash, a life that asked for toughness and left behind tenderness anyway. Then even those small sounds begin to soften, and the prairie receives them back into its great unhurried dark, while history moves on and memory, gentler than history, stays behind.